Would you let Jeffrey Epstein watch your kids? Didn't think so. What about his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell? Hard pass. So why trust him? Mark Carney, Maxwell's friend, not yours.
Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show, into week 3 of this election. And it's just getting uglier as we go, I think. But, well, we've still got more time. There's a little ways to go yet. We're, a little more than halfway through, actually. And, but I mean, that liberal juggernaut, if the polls are to be believed, is still moving right along, except out here in the West. You know where I'll go with things, assuming the Liberals become reelected anyways. But we'll talk more on that later today. So I'm going to be speaking with Laurent Carbonneau. He's an author. He put out a book called At the Trough. It's the rise and rise of Canada's corporate welfare bums. And I think it's a good discussion. You know, one of the things that neither the Conservatives or the Liberals ever talk about in elections? Corporate welfare. They don't touch that one because the donors, it's a great game. You know, you donate to both parties and just make sure that you'll always get subsidies coming your way. And they never want to talk about that during the election, so maybe we should bring it up. You know, if a politician doesn't want to hear about something in an election, I think it's something we should talk about. Also, of course, we'll have news and rants and all the other stuff going on. This is live. Use that comment scroll over there, guys. Mr. Stanley Paradoxy, good to see you there. Send the comments, questions my way. I see them all, Jacqueline. And I don't necessarily read them all out, but I do see them. It helps me keep the show flowing. And just one more reminder, I'll talk about that again in a bit, but the Western Standard is free right now. Get on there after my show, of course. You can get through the paywall. There is no paywall for the remainder of the election. I mean, it's important. We got to get the news out there. You can get through without spending a nickel. See all our writings on there. Multiple columnists and news stories constantly breaking. All right, let's talk about what I gave for the title of the show and what I'm talking about today. Because, yeah, the markets are up and down, but what some people hold on to is their homes, though. At least I've still got that, right? It'll float, the equity will go up. Well, yeah, okay, but it's a target, too. I mean, it's the biggest private asset pool in Canada is the combined equity of Canadian citizens. Decades, actually a century of labor, savings, and ambition has created a private housing market worth an estimated $4.7 trillion. And rest assured, the Liberals desperately want a piece of it. I mean, that equity just hangs like a plum, waiting to be picked for those liberal ideologues. They won't be able to resist making a move on it for much longer. And Mark Carney is no less an ideologue than his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, was. Carney's been as obsessed with net zero targets as Trudeau, and to make things worse, Carney's smarter. A witless ideologue was bad enough, but now Canada faces a smart one. Let's face it, the net zero movement, it's never been about the environment. It's an excuse for policies based on wealth redistribution. The carbon tax proved that clearly enough. Canada's carbon taxes, whether provincial or federal, had no impact on the environment. Not a single raindrop or any snowflakes were created or delayed by the tax. Taxes can't change the weather, and the Liberals always knew this. Taxes can shift wealth around, though, and they used the carbon tax for that purpose. That's why carbon tax rebates were issued based on personal wealth. The personal carbon tax failed, though, by every measure. It didn't create the equitable workers' paradise, nor did it bring an end to climate change. It turned into a policy disaster so wildly unpopular among Canadians that the Liberals were forced to dump it. Carney, well, he'll apply it to companies if given the chance, but don't worry, you'll still get your chance to pay for the carbon tax as it trickles down, but you won't see it up front anymore. The Liberals are campaigning against themselves right now, and the most frightening part is it's working. People believe that the party obsessed with wealth redistribution and taxing the very breath you exhale has had an epiphany, and now they support tax cuts, government size reduction, and pipeline construction. All this proves that the Liberals are a party willing to say anything to get elected. Their ideology hasn't changed. They're simply suppressing it until the end of the election campaign. So how are they reconciling it with themselves? I mean, when they want to redistribute all that wealth, as their party offers a carbon copy of the Conservative platform. How does a wealth redistributionist sleep at night when they're abandoning their primary tool to reach into the pockets of citizens? Well, they have a grander plan, and it involves the home equity of citizens. The Liberals have been toying with the notion of taking a bite from the home equity of Canadians for years. They just haven't been able to figure out a way to implement it. The Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation is the federal government arm managing home financing. The CMHC has been tasked multiple times by the government, and they've spent hundreds of thousands of tax dollars studying how to implement a home equity tax on primary residences. Why would they spend the money if they don't want to do it? Each time this leaks out, though, the Liberals denied, oh no, we weren't considering such a thing. And then they do it again. They dig in again. The CMHC also tapped into the wisdom of an extreme activist named Paul Kershaw, who manages a group called Generation Squeeze. His focus is on intergenerational wealth redistribution, and he sees taxing home equity as the means to an ideological end. Kershaw referred to homeowners as lottery winners, and how people who owned homes gained equity while sitting around scratching themselves and watching TV. It's a gross insult to the people who scraped and saved to get into the home ownership market and dedicated thousands of hours of their lives to maintaining and upgrading their properties to build that equity. Kershaw demonstrates the vilest of politics of envy, where he refuses to acknowledge the right of others to enjoy the fruits of their labor and feels it's the role of the state to take that equity away from them. Now, while it's tempting to dismiss Kershaw as just another flake with Marxist leanings, it would be dangerous to do so. That's because Kershaw has counseled the Liberal cabinet directly in a retreat they held on Prince Edward Island just the summer before last. He was invited there. He was asked there. You don't bring somebody as extreme as Kershaw to lecture your top government lieutenants without a plan to embrace those teachings. Most of the cabinet ministers who sat in on that retreat are still with Carney's team today. Trudeau might be gone, but the same Liberal snake remains. All they did was change out the head. If Carney wins this election, he's going to be faced with a challenge. He's been trying to match Poilievre promise for promise with vows to cut taxes and expand programs, but he hasn't mentioned cutting a dime of spending. So if spending isn't cut, how's Carney going to fund his platform? A home equity tax would give him just that tool. They'll frame it as an essential measure, considering a trade war emergency. They could call it a temporary measure or something to help the next generation get on its feet. They'll say it's just a little bite. And rest assured, they'll say it's for fairness. Anybody opposing such a move will be called selfish, and they'll be pilloried in the public eye as the Liberals stoke class division based on age and wealth. It was a formula used by a certain revolution in 1917, as a matter of fact, and it was effective, and it could be used again. Envy during tough economic times is a strong motivator. Have you noticed in the last few years, there's been a line on your tax return asking about your home equity? Why would they ask that? They wouldn't add it without a reason. They're building the runway, guys. Carney has an ideological agenda, and if you think your savings in home equity are immune from it, think again. All right. Well, that's what's got me going. I'm watching my equity, trying to build it. How's it going, Dave?
Good. You got me depressed now.
Well, I'm not here to make people happy. Poor John's already been getting some of the emails from some of my.
I know. I'm supposed to be a lottery winner because I've scrimped and saved and worked.
That's right.
Paid my mortgage.
The home fell onto your lap, right?
Unbelievable. I'm sorry to hear one of your beehives died.
It did.
What happened?
Well, from what I can gather, when I opened it up, it was a little while ago, I think I didn't have it properly tilted. These are the little things with beekeeping, so that the moisture would drain out of it when condensation builds up. So basically an ice ball built up within my hive and froze my bees, because there was a lot of dead bees. There was still lots of honey, so they didn't starve. And I checked the mite counts, which are always an issue with bees, and no, there was not a high mite count on them. So I'm thinking I screwed up on the angle of the hive.
Tough hobby.
Yeah, well, it's unforgiving when you screw up. Anyways, I still enjoy it, but there's lots of mistakes to make.
Good. So last night in a big speech in Washington, President Trump said anybody who's going to be complaining, any world leaders who are complaining about the tariffs can, quote, kiss his ass. Right? Very presidential, very dignified.
It's pretty ugly optic.
It is. So apparently this morning, Trump pulled his head out of his own ass and stopped the tariffs. He's announced a 90-day pause on all the tariffs, except for China, which he raised to more than 100%.
Yeah.
So now the trade war is basically USA versus China, and the rest of the world stands by and figures out what the guy's going to do next, which is almost impossible. But the news has instantly sent the stock market soaring. Dow Jones was up 2,200 points when I came in. So I think everybody who's got money invested somewhere just took a big sigh of relief and hopefully the bleeding has stopped. So that's the big stuff on the site right now. Liberal leader Mark Carney was in town again still, where he announced plans to make Canada a world energy superpower. I think a line he stole directly from Stephen Harper. But as we know, he's good at plagiarizing stuff in this campaign. So he laid out his plan to create this energy superpower. And our energy expert Sean Polzer is now digging into it to think, well, I guess first of all, do you believe him or is he just lying? And what exactly the policies will do. You remember our good friend Robbie Starbuck, the battler of the woke down in the States. Earlier this year, he forced Harley Davidson to go back on their woke policies. And the CEO of Harley Davidson walked the plank today and rode off into the sunset with the disastrous DEI policies left behind him.
Probably on a Vespa anyway.
Yeah, probably. Pierre Poilievre was somewhere today, Ontario, I think, saying he's going to introduce sort of a 3 strikes and you're in jail forever type thing, much like the United States has. And my favorite story of the morning is Kentucky Fried Chicken. Nothing like a cold piece of Kentucky Fried Chicken for breakfast. They've now introduced a Kentucky Fried Chicken toothpaste. So you can brush your teeth and have the Colonel's secret recipe as your tangy, your mouthwash in the morning.
Greet the day with chicken breath.
Yeah, exactly. So I know what I'm getting. You used to keep chickens, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another one of your failed hobbies.
I ended up killing all them too. That was long story.
It's with the way you kill animals. It's amazing that Duke the Wonder Dog has been able to get as old as he is.
No, he gets spoiled rotten. He's about he is useless to the household cycle as the chickens became eventually when they stopped laying. But unlike chickens that you'll euthanize and cook later, yeah, I'm afraid Duke is just going to retire as a big hairy lump on our floor.
Good for Duke.
Yeah. All right, that's all you got?
Are you kidding me? Yeah, it's all tariffs all the time at the moment, waiting for Canadian reaction and all that sort of good stuff. So
right on. Well, I'll let you get back to the newsroom and have your eyes glazed with that TV next to you and watch the stories rolling in from the reporters and columnists across the country we got out there.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Right on. Thanks, Dave.
You bet, Cory.
All right. So yes, guys, all that news is coming out there hard, heavy, and fast, and it's breaking. I mean, that the Trump's latest reversal on most of the tariffs that just broke half an hour ago, and the story has already been up on the Standard for a while. Like, we are a news organization. We put the stuff up as it happens, as it breaks. It's original content, and now's your chance to get on and check it out for free. There's no paywall. You can get on there, westernstandard.news, get right through, see the stories, see the columns, all of those things. And, of course, just get a taste of things. It's important during the election. But it's still important for you guys to subscribe. So we do hope those of you who can subscribe do so. It's $10 a month, $100 for a year. That's how we have those reporters. That's how we do this show. That's how we keep all of these things rolling. But, yeah, what just a roller coaster. The only thing anybody can predict with Trump is that you can't predict anything with Trump. I mean, I'm not going to complain that he's backed off on the tariffs. Obviously, the markets have appreciated that, but it's the instability. And of course, he doesn't say they're done. He just says, we're just going to stop for 90 days. And who knows? He might change his mind in a week and say we're going to put him back. We just don't know. The other thing you got to wonder, as somebody else was pointing out in the newsroom, boy, if there was a plan for this, if you were on the inside, if you actually knew what the president was up to, boy, you could really make out well, couldn't you? You could watch as the markets tumble down, way down there, and then you could buy like crazy because, boy, with the Dow going up 2,000 points in like an hour today, people buying into some select stocks really made out very, very well today. To be honest, though, I don't think there's that much planning behind what President Trump does, but I don't think he's purposely doing this. I think he just does whatever the hell rattles through that strange orange brain of his. But trying to predict what Trump is going to do, I might as well bet the horses for as far as that goes to try and make any money. It's just unpredictable, but it's getting tiresome, and it's heavily impacting the Canadian election, which is unfortunate. If there's any time for 40 days, we should be just looking at our own leadership, at all of the parties, at all of the options, and discussing those and discussing policy. It's during a campaign. And I know, Trump has no reason to care what's going on up here. Unfortunately, though, this is the first election in my living memory where the actions of a foreign government have far more impact on our current election campaign than the actions of our own candidates. And it's pretty darn frustrating. It's frustrating for us as a news outlet to try and cover the election when the bloody tariffs are constantly keeping the things in the scroll. But we'll do what we can. Okay, so I'm going to get on to my guest, Laurent Carbonneau. He wrote a book, as I said, At the Trough, The Rise of Canada's Corporate Welfare Bums. And it's a good read, and it's a fun one. He coined the term Valdemanis Rasputin of the Rock. I mean, that's just brilliant. I couldn't imagine those words coming out, but it was a great descriptor. So, I mean, he adds some great levity in the writing on a subject that is typically pretty dry, but very important. And it's very timely right now as we're having these economic discussions. So if we bring Mr. Carbonneau in, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, delighted to. Thanks, Cory.
So, as I said, I mean, this is pretty timely, and it's an issue that really does transcend progressive or conservative politics, because historically, as your book lays out all the way through Canadian history, parties of both stripes have both heavily participated in corporate welfare.
Yeah, everyone's been a very eager practitioner at some point, and everyone's been a very eager critic at some point, kind of depending on who happens to be in power and who controls the purse string. So, yeah, it's an interesting project. I think that, I was kind of looking at it first from the perspective of, what have the last 8-10 years looked like? And then it just kept kind of suggesting itself like, well, can you really get all of that if you don't understand sort of how we got here and how we kind of built up this apparatus and ended up going back to, the railways and the national policy and giving it a pretty thorough look from the founding of Canada onwards.
Well, and our railways certainly were some heavily subsidized in a number of ways, juggernauts, and really not necessarily the nicest corporate actors on the Canadian landscape back then.
No, not a bit. Yeah, we ended up subsidizing them to the tune of a very, very appreciable. Well, actually, I think it was multiples of the federal budget at the time. Obviously, staged out over a certain number of years, but really tremendous fiscal outlays that were paid for. You were just talking about tariffs. By tariffs, very, very heavy tariffs paid for by Canadians for everyday goods and services. And all of that largesse, some of it, of course, going to actually build a railway, but a lot of it getting scooped up by financial engineering that the railways did to kind of, inflate their own stock, claim dividends, and also try to buy out their own competitors that weren't being subsidized. So a pretty tawdry kind of corporate affair, all things considered.
Yeah, and I mean, the story just never seems to change. So it was the people on the ground working, they get nailed with the tariffs. And again, the irony of how this is working, that was the case in the Canadian agriculture a lot. They had to pay tariffs on farm implements. That gave government revenue. The government gave that revenue to the railways, and the railways would then gouge the farmers to transport the implements and the crops with railway fares. But, I mean, I guess the case is kind of made. Would the railways have been built without government direct intervention like that?
Yeah, probably not, right? Like the government very consciously made the decision, on kind of national interest grounds that we needed a railway to the Pacific. And they were probably right to do that, at a certain level. And of course, that was part of BC joining Confederation, was they would get the railway within a certain number of years, which I promise we didn't actually keep, but we did end up building it. The real thesis behind it was that if you built it fast enough, then you'd have a lot of settlement sort of follow along the line of the railroad. That ended up not really happening on the timescale that, people thought it would. And I think, in hindsight, we probably overpaid for the railroad, especially considering that, as I mentioned, a lot of it went into this kind of financial engineering and sort of profiteering versus actually building the thing. So, in hindsight, they kind of had their eyes bigger than their stomachs and went into and made a bad deal, based on a lot of hype and on a lot of, just wanting to be seen to be doing something versus making a considered policy decision, which is a theme we see time and time again in Canadian history.
Yeah, and I mean, the subsidies left, I guess, a tangible asset. I mean, the railway still provided a service that helped develop the West and unified the country. end to end. But those policies didn't stop. And we see it at every level of government too. I mean, we're getting to contemporary politics. I know Alberta was terrible. We had a few corporations, MagCan, Novotel. The government dove into those, and those went completely broke, and we had nothing left when we were finished with them. And the list gets pretty long with these kinds of investments.
Yeah, it does. And I look at a couple of big provincial mega deals. And that's the thing, as I noticed, looking throughout Canadian history, the feds will tend to do just a constant stream of money going out the door, where the provinces will sort of make these big deals that, are supposed to be very transformational. And I look at what happened in Newfoundland after they joined Confederation, and it was this just like blitz of spending on trying to set up as many industries as possible. Under Joey Smallwood. And as you mentioned, Alfred Velmanis, who was his sort of economic development czar. And then I look as well at Saskatchewan, which set similar trajectory there as Alberta, big resource projects, very much was seen coming by their counterparties on that at FCL, the Federated Co-ops. And then New Brunswick, which is kind of my favorite example, the Brooklyn car. Which was a kind of this cool gull-wing sports car that was built in the early 70s in New Brunswick. They built about 3,000. The government was in for about $20 million on that, which, in the grand scheme of things is not astronomical, but for a small, poor rural province in the 70s, that is a pretty good chunk of change. They sold 3,000 and lost money on every single one, and they folded after that. And it's a kind of more of a sad story than me laughing at them. I used to live in New Brunswick, love the place, and it's disappointing to see that governments time and time again sort of prey on the hopes of people to make these bad choices, and perhaps they're themselves preyed upon by these kind of sort of corporate hucksters. But it's a bit of a tragic story at the provincial level often.
Yeah, no, and I understand the feeling with the people in New Brunswick. That's why I brought up as an Albertan. I'm a proud Albertan, but I can point out we screwed up just as badly with the subsidy game as any other province. Here. No, I mean, the rule you would think is just to stay out of them. I mean, the failure record, if you're just looking at the ones that make it versus the ones that fail, is terrible. And any business person looking at a record like that would say, I'm not going to invest in something like this, but we just can't seem to stay out of this. It's too politically hard to extricate themselves.
Yeah, it's hard, right? And Janice McKinnon, who was Roy Romano's finance minister in the 90s, has a really good memoir out that talks about a lot of this in the context of Saskatchewan. And she mentions, at the end of the day, a lot of provinces and the federal government are really reliant on, the commodity prices, right? And Alberta's certainly feeling this right now with the price of oil. And the reality is that commodity prices don't come up for re-election, but governments do. And governments have to have something to say to people, who want them to be looking out for their well-being. I think it's a bit of a tragedy. It's just like there's a time and a place for government participation in the economy. And certainly there are countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Sweden, and Finland that have worked out ways to do this pretty effectively. Finland in a lot of ways, and Sweden, their economy both looked a lot like ours 100 years ago. A lot of forestry, a lot of agriculture, a lot of mining. And they've managed to become, fairly small countries, but real powerhouses in certain parts of the economy with real big global players like Nokia and Ericsson. And of course, South Korea has its own huge giants. Taiwan has TSMC making semiconductors. None of that was, happened by accident. Government had a big part in that. But the really key distinction between us and them, and the big difference, is that they have built these institutions that are good at making these effective decisions and building the kind of infrastructure to sustain that over time, where we don't, right? And we never have. And it's a real political failing more than it is a failing of, Canadians. It's just that, our governments aren't equipped and haven't bothered to equip themselves to make these decisions well.
Yeah, and the reality is when money goes into companies for subsidies, whether they fail or succeed, there's certain people seem to walk away with some pretty full pockets and things. One of the things you point out in the book, R&D is one of their favorite kind of areas you can, because it's more ethereal. People, it's hard to compartmentalize exactly what the money was spent on. You can just say R&D and this is our end outcome we'd like to see, but it's hard to track whether the money was effective or not and whether it went to the right place.
Yeah, and like our system in Canada here on research and development is really based on the SR&ED tax credit, right, which is about $4 billion a year, give or take. It's gone up and down a bit over the years. And the big problem there is less the paper trail administration. There's actually a lot of administration, a lot of overhead. You have to be pretty exhaustive in what you're trying to define as research. And the CRA does audit very frequently on this. If you ask me, the big problem with shred is that a lot of it ends up going to these really big, profitable, and large foreign companies that are employing a handful of Canadians to do research and development work. That then gets turned into IP that gets commercialized abroad, which is not just profits we're missing out on in Canada in terms of corporate taxes that could pay for things like hospitals and schools. It's also because they're tied up in IP rights. It's blocking Canadian companies from competing in those areas abroad. So we're paying money for people to do research that then makes Canadian companies less competitive on the world stage, which, I think if you were looking back objectively at, when we're talking about subsidies, you'd want to make your companies more competitive abroad and export more. And in fact, like that subsidy in particular is having the opposite effect.
Yeah, so I mean, getting a little more current with something people have been worried about and what we're seeing is speaking of foreign-owned companies, when we're looking at like Volkswagen and others, the battery plants, and it's not looking very good. We're not seeing the jobs created. They, of course, said they were going to be created, but we certainly have seen the money go out there. Is there going to be a good end to this? It's not looking very bright right now.
Well, the silver lining, such as it is that a lot of the money won't go out the door at all because a lot of this is tied up in production credits. So the idea is for every battery, they're going to get a certain amount of money back. So at some level, if they don't make the batteries like good, because it means we won't be wasting money on this. The other piece is, you mentioned the jobs there. Like, I remember when they announced this, like we were talking about effectively negative unemployment in Southwestern Ontario, right? So really what we were saying was, to local employers, you're going to be competing with these big subsidized international giants to keep your staff, while you can barely find enough to run your own business right now. So from my point of view, like the numbers involved are really astronomical, but it's just that what was the value proposition here, right? Like we're going to be assembling batteries, which sure has value, but we're going to be doing it to generate profits abroad. So it's, as I kind of said in the book, it's a Green New Deal for shareholders of Volkswagen and Stellantis rather than a real investment in making Canada more prosperous.
Well, and I things kind of broke too fast for you to really cover it in the book, but I'd like your speculation on it. We're seeing a big temptation, probably from both countries, to really try for introverted economies. If we can't trust the integrated economy we had with our southern neighbors, people asking to subsidize domestic businesses, particularly in manufacturing or R&D, are probably going to be quite welcomed by the government, but they better beware when they're thinking about throwing money at these ventures because, the shysters come out of the woodworks when the time comes, right?
Well, we did this once already, right? And it was the national policy, right? Where we set up these big tariff walls with the U.S. and then U.S. companies came and built branch plants in Canada. And what it left us with was an industrial structure that hadn't developed any capacity to innovate, only served our home market, so wasn't especially competitive, and really didn't build the kinds of like big firms that, like, especially in today's economy, are what actually drive economic growth. So it was a really bad deal for Canada, and especially, as I mentioned, paid for largely by tariffs. So everyone was paying more to get, worse quality. And I guess this is kind of like the Loblaws effect writ large across the entire economy. Is you can't, to some extent, you really want your Canadian companies to be competing as far and wide as possible. That's only good for Canadians, really. So I'd be very worried about a push to try and do national policy too here.
Yeah, it's government and market intervention rarely ends well for us, but it doesn't look like we're heading down a path where we're going to see less of it in the near future. So I mean, all we can hope for is that they do it a little more wisely than they used to.
Yeah, that would certainly be the best case scenario. I think, like you, it's I don't really foresee an end to government participation in the economy. I of course come from a part of the political spectrum where that's less of an intrinsically bad thing. But I obviously am very critical of the way it's been done for most of Canadian history, and I do think we can do differently. Well, we have to do differently, and I think we can do it better. So here's hoping, I guess, amid a lot of uncertainty here, and hopefully what ends up being a bit of a motivator to finally get it right.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you writing up on that for part of that series. And just to close out, so you're the Director of Policy and Research at the Council of Canadian Innovators. Where can people find your work in general?
Well, CanadianInnovators.org is I write the Mooseworks blog for my day job, and then of course the book is At the Trough: The Rise and Rise of Canada's Corporate Welfare Bums, published by Sutherland House, and a big thanks to them. And you findable really wherever fine books are sold. Try your local independent bookstore.
Great. Well, I appreciate you reading the book, and I appreciate you coming on. And guys, yeah, this is the book here. I got a copy of it. It's a good read, and this Sutherland series has been really good with sort of short, expanded essay form sort of books covering some of these subjects. So you don't have to read a big, thick, boring book on economy, just a good condensed one on the important issues. So, well, thank you again for coming on to talk to us today, and I look forward to your future work.
Thanks so much, Cory. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. So yeah, guys, check that out. As I said, Laurent Carbonneau and the book's At the Trough. And as I said, it's one of those few issues. I mean, we're so polarized right now on so many things politically and that, but left or right, pretty much everybody gets horrified and annoyed when you see wasted corporate welfare, when you see subsidies, when we see crony capitalism. You know, I'm a capitalist, I'm a libertarian, I want to see minimal government if the government's going to dip in to the business market. And, you know, as a libertarian, I'd rather not see them do it whatsoever. But man, guys, try to do it with some controls. Try to have some oversight. Try to do something with it. But more often than not, there's two things that go wrong. Again, they don't give the money to the business that's the best at conducting whatever that industry is. They give it to whoever the best lobbyist is. And then once it's handed out, it just isn't done as well as it would be with a company that had to raise its own money. You know, when I look at subsidized numbers, you know, when we're talking, I forget what the totals he had in here, something like 30 billion a year in corporate welfare in Canada now, or 20 billion. Think of the numbers this way, you know, with the failure rate of corporate welfare. I don't want to see it at all. I don't. But let's say you took 20 billion, but broke it out into small business loans or small business grants to people with creative ideas. You know, there's a lot of people with a lot of brilliant ideas that would like the chance to get a good start. Even, you know, what are we talking? $1 million grants. You could give out, how many is that? You know, it's in $1 billion, it's $1,000 million grants you could give out. In $20 billion, 20,000 businesses could be given $1 million startup grants. Or $100,000 startup grants. Then you could give, tens of thousands of these grants out, hundreds of thousands of these grants out for the money every year to small businesses getting going, whether it's a little restaurant, whether it's a pharmacy, whether it's a small manufacturing idea, whether it's a little software startup. Even if half of those businesses failed, they'd still be doing better than what these corporate welfare bums are doing all the time. And no, I don't want them in on it. But when we think of those numbers and how badly we're getting screwed by them, because we are, because it comes out of your pocket. It comes out of the money you work, or other companies that are successful and working hard. It comes out of their taxes and gets put to these unsuccessful ones that often fail or take the money out of the country. I talk about that too, and I talk about the CBC. When I talk about we need this for national news coverage and things like that. Okay, fine. Again, break those numbers out. $1.4 billion to the CBC. Well, again, let's see, you could give out grants to 1,400 independent media outlets of $1 million a year for the price of the CBC. 1,400 little independent outlets across the country. Think about that. 140 outlets per province with a budget of $1 million each, just the base budget. They could possibly gain revenue through subscriptions and advertising like everyone else. And again, I'm not saying this is the way we should go. I think CBC should just be shut down. We should get tax breaks. But value for dollar, if you really wanted local news coverage, if you broke it up like that, we would be far better served as a country than what the garbage they spoon feed us from the CBC is for that price of $1.4 billion a year. And growing. And growing. Carney's talking about, yes, there we go. Just in time, Jacqueline said, yeah, another $150 million announced from Carney. And, you know, it's a sick trough, and none of us are getting served well by it. Joe Mills put it all right, one of our commenters here, just saying, a government should only provide a place where companies want to invest in. And he's right. You know, Canada, if it was run right, is gifted. As my guest said, too, you know, look at Sweden and Norway. I mean, these are isolated cold climates, but they've built smart, strong economies in their small areas. The amount of resources we have, the proximity to a massive customer, even if it's being managed by a crazy man right now, still, the United States is a fantastic neighbor to have next door. And over the long run, it's going to be a great nation to be next to. So our resources, we have that. We're peaceful for the most part. We've got a good population. We could be incredibly rich. We could be drawing investment from all over the world. The government needs to get out of the damn way. One of the best examples of that on a small scale, and this one not that small, was the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. It drives me nuts when I see liberal fart catchers making excuses for that thing and saying, look, Albertans, you should be happy. We gave you the Trans Mountain. No, you didn't, you peckerheads. They regulated it to death. Kinder Morgan wanted to build that line. They wanted to build that expansion. And they were going to use nothing but private dollars to do it. But Prime Minister Ding Dong brought in so many bloody regulations, C-69, endless consultations with First Nations bands that aren't actually nations, so we got to get through that thing. I'll talk about that in a moment. And they just said, you know what, we're done, we're out, we've had enough, we can't do it. We're finished. And that's when the government finally realized it actually overplayed its hand. It had already shut down Energy East. It had already shut down the Northern Gateway. The Coastal Gas Link was mired in protests and applications and paperwork and baloney. And then Kinder Morgan pulled out on this. And wow, okay, we've got a serious problem. So what did they do? The only thing the dingbats could do? No, not the only thing they could do. The thing they could have done is fast-track the bloody approvals, got out of the way, and Kinder Morgan would have come in. But instead they said, no, we're smarter than that. We'll just build it. Yeah, we can do it. Yeah, a pipeline that was supposed to cost initially, what, $4 or $5 billion? It cost so far $30 billion. It came in, 7 years late. It's absurd. Complete ripoff. Jacqueline saying the numbers were, 6.9 under Kinder Morgan was the estimate, and it came in at $37 billion. Like, yeah, I'm going off the top of my head with it, right? It's nuts, and it shouldn't cost that much. This wasn't even a fresh pipe, guys. This was just putting one right next to one that was already existing since just after World War II. It was an expansion. The right-of-way was already there. And, yeah, Bumpy Johnson, a commenter, saying Trudeau Liberals might have made a mess of First Nation relations. At least they signed away billions in reconciliation funds. Yeah, Dark Robe saying, imagine building Russian-style housing for Canada. Yeah, again, that's when, this is what this housing talk, too. When we're getting governments promising, we're going to build this many houses, we're going to build that many houses. It's not the government's role to build the stinking houses. Get out of the damn way. We have a skilled workforce. We have massive resources. We have more lumber than most of the countries in the world. We could build these houses, get out of the way, dump the regulations, get rid of it, the redundancies, the garbage, and that's on every level of government. And likewise with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I remember writing a column on that and researching it. This is a line, again, this is just the expansion of an existing line. It's going to go from Alberta to BC. They managed to build that in 18 months, the original line, back at the start of the 50s. With that technology. And it had something like 12 or 1,300 licenses and permits that it needed to have. That's stupid. That's BS. Come on. How many different things? How much do you have to study? How much do you have to apply for? There are parasitic, bloody bureaucrats holding up this project, that project, and every project for all these stupid things. And they are not helping us. They're not saving the environment. They're just arseholes lining their pockets. Because they've created a cottage industry, and one of the favorite things they like to cloak themselves around is First Nations consultation. And yes, it's been, and stupidly, because it's race-based policy, but consultation of Indigenous people is a part of the Constitution. We have to consult before doing anything. But remember what consult means. It doesn't mean we need consent. It means we're obligated to reach out and talk to them. And try to be, up and up with it. Do you have real concerns? Address real concerns. But it can't, you're not looking for pure consent. You can't get to a point of just waiting until we've had full buy-in, because you can die of old age on that, because there's always going to be somebody pissed off. No, we consulted, we were in good faith, we did what we could, now it's done, it's going ahead, it's over, because you are not sovereign nations. There's what I want to get onto when we get both Poilievre and Carney talking, saying, we're going to expand Canada's, we're going to turn, Carney just said, we're going to turn Canada into an energy superpower, and Poilievre saying the same thing. Fine, we're not getting anything done until we get realistic about what First Nations are. They're not sovereign nations. They aren't. They never were. First Nation bands, they're not separate countries. They don't have this veto power that we've applied to them on anything and everything. But as long as we pretend they have that ability, we can't get anything done. They're at best very, very empowered municipalities. And the fact that we force consultation, even, and I'm not talking about when we're crossing an actual reserve, we end up getting mired in this stuff with every project anywhere that gets done in any time. That's enough. It's stupid. It's stupid. And there's thousands of lawyers robbing us blind, bureaucrats, and some self-serving people within the Indigenous communities that just make a fortune on this endless consultation racket. And it's a racket. We're going to get it done or not. But we've got to get somebody with the knackers to say that. And I don't expect it anytime soon. The politicians are terrified of the Indigenous issues. And it's time to stop. It's time to stop. I mean, how well has it served them? How good is it doing? How are the reserves doing? They getting rich yet? You know, we've been doing decades of this consultation, decades of reconciliation, billions and billions and billions of dollars handed out. And what did we get? In Alberta, First Nations people have a life expectancy 20 years lower than the average person. Really, look it up. That's real. 20 years. Or 19, I think it was. 19 to change. Nobody talks about that. It's failing. That's absurd. That's one of the headlines we should see all over the bloody place. That's what's happened to their life expectancy despite handing out all the money, despite handing out self-government, despite endlessly consulting, despite empowerment, despite every possible government program in the world. But we want to know why? Want to know why it's failing? Because it's race-based policy. You're separating people based on their bloodline. The world is supposed to have grown beyond that. Martin Luther King must be just doing backflips in his grave because his goal was for us to get together. And the idiocy we're doing with the First Nations things is separating them, sticking them on racially based enclaves, and just throwing money at them, which has been misused most often. It's not getting to the people on the ground, and even if it does, what are you supposed to do? Sit in the house, spend your money, watch TV? Because there's not many resources or industries in these little areas. Look where the reserves are. Even if you want to do more, what are you going to do? How can a population not be dysfunctional in that circumstance? So, if we need longer term thinking on this. We really do. We got to start looking at actually what works. That's one of the things politicians, when we talk about corporate welfare, things in general, as I was speaking of. Enough of what your intentions are. I don't give a hoot what your intention was. I want to know what the outcome's going to be. And if the policy won't work, then stop doing it. Corporate welfare doesn't work. Stop it. This First Nations setup we have right now doesn't work. Doesn't work by any measure. Hasn't worked. No government. And again, the Conservatives and Liberals, they're no better than each other. It doesn't work. And the people who are suffering the most are the Indigenous people on the ground. It's not like they're living in the lap of luxury because of all this. No, they're miserable. The suicide rates blow other rates off the charts. The health issues, because dietary-wise, they're socially dysfunctional. They're in a terrible condition that way. Household violence, abuse, of course, addiction, it's through the roof. It's awful. Education, the graduation rates, almost non-existent on the isolated reserves. How can you point at that and say we should stay on this trajectory? Yet they do. They do. You're not allowed to say you change it. If you point out trying to change that system, you'll be called the R word. You know it. You get it every time. That's always the defense. You're a racist. It has nothing to do with bloody race. It's a system. It's a system. It's a sick system. It's a broken system. So either way, we're listening to a bunch of politicians all out there asking for our votes. And they're all giving the same sorts of lines. And this is where the cynicism gets built. Because most of them, I've certainly got my preferences. I do not want to see Carney, and I want to see those liberal snakes back in there for another term. But the Conservatives do the same thing in the sense that they just promise. They're not really worried about whether it's going to work later. It's just a matter of getting the votes today. We'll worry about whether or not something will work now. Western Standard, the issue with consultation is the court's involvement then determining when consultation has been fulfilled. Some courts enforcing Gladue case law. Okay, that's from Bumpy Johnson. This is another final one. Let's talk about justice, law, and order and things like that. And the three strikes law, and that's probably the thing that would kill it for Poilievre if it tries to get to the courts. For people unfamiliar with it, the Gladue principles. based on a past case, forces judges to essentially give a pass whenever possible to Indigenous offenders because of bad, challenges in upbringing and the disadvantages that Indigenous people have had to endure. But it's not working. Some of our worst repeat offenders, horrifically out there, unfortunately, whatever, but they've been First Nations people. That's a reflection, again, of the broken system, not some inherent thing that their race is a bunch of criminals. See, that's where the game starts getting played. That's what you're saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying it's put people into a situation, a social situation, where crime is through the roof. And embittered, dysfunctional people tend to commit more of those crimes, and it does perpetuate itself. But giving different sentencing structures to dangerous offenders based on their racial background is stupid, and it's not working, and that's the Gladio thing. Yes. And it puts us all at risk. Because, yeah, it might be awful. Some of these offenders, you could read a life story on them, and it is horrific. They might have been abused as children. They might have grown up in squalor. They might have been, terribly beaten, terrified, traumatized. It's terrible. But it doesn't make them any less dangerous once they've responded to it through participating in violent crimes. The cause of the issue doesn't make them less dangerous. That means we have to still keep them incarcerated until we get a magic pill that we can give to a violent offender that suddenly makes them want to stop harming people. We need to keep them locked up. But instead, we take some of the worst and we let them go. It just fails. I just want to see policy that works. That's why I liked the discussion with Mr. Carbonneau. I'm pragmatic to a degree. I accept there's going to be a degree of corporate welfare. I can't stand it. I'd rather see zero. That's my ideology, but I understand there will be some. So let's try to see if we can get some that would work, or at least work a little closer to what's acceptable. But we got to look at outcomes instead of intention, right? I don't care how many jobs you think it's going to create. Prove it's going to create jobs. I don't care how bad, again, the challenges this individual have. Prove that this person's safe before you release them. It's a lot to ask, but keep asking your politicians, guys. This is the time for it. This is an election time. Hold their feet to the fire. Ask them how they're going to make these policies work. Tell them your vote's not coming until you can show you're going to do a better bloody job. We've got a few weeks to work on that. We'll keep reporting on that. Again, remember, one more time, I'll keep nagging you. Western Standard. No paywall right now. Free to get in there. Get in and read. Check out those stories while you can. And then when you learn to love it, take out a subscription when that free period ends. Okay, thanks, guys. The pipeline will be on tonight, and I'll be on this Friday with a few guests. I got Adam Zivo, Sam Cooper, and we'll be breaking down the election on that day live, starting at 11 a.m. Western or Mountain Standard Time. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you in the next one.